ambient music, you want all of your sounds to be tonally in keeping. And that's why in this episode, I've created everything out of Ableton's Drift instrument. I've also included a handy template that you can download from the Patreon. But don't forget, the tips I'm about to share can be applied to any instrument. Let's dive into it. What is up, friends? Before we talk about our first instrument, don't forget that this episode is sponsored by DistroKid. I'll have more about them at the end of this episode. Let's talk sound selection. Currently, songs like Øneheart, Snowfall, and Jake's Golden Hour have made it popular for songs to be recorded outside of the 440 Hz kind of traditional tuning methods. This won't make that much of a difference because your music's going to be in key with itself, but for the sake of replicating this trend, I'll show you how to do it inside Drift. If you're a fan of Øneheart, this instrument probably sounds fairly similar. I've created it in Drift, and first off, we're going to turn off Oscillator 1. Oscillator 1 doesn't allow us to utilize the detune. So we're just using Oscillator 2, and we're going to turn that detune up to about 0.30. You want to add a little bit of noise volume. Adding a little noise to your instrument gives it this familiar analog tone for the listener, grounding your instrument in some sort of realism. Pull our frequency down a little bit, which is going to shave off any of that harsh treble sound and increase the attack and release to give your instrument more of a pad-like sound. We're going to introduce some bass later, so you can also increase the high pass filter just a little bit too. Finally, you want there to be a little bit of unison, and you can increase this by about 5%. Fun fact, your lead instrument is going to be pretty similar to this with minor changes, just in a higher octave. From here, you can add the chorus ensemble for a little bit of width, and then you're going to add delay. Reverb and delay within this context is really going to be your secret sauce for making your instrument sound like they're unending in a cavern of space. So apply your delay. I had a sync of about 2, and then I increased my dry wet to about 44%. Turn on ping pong and add a little bit of filter as well, so that your repeating notes can sit in their own space too. You might have noticed that my main instrument and my lead are sitting in their own group called the verb group. This has a little bit of glue compression and a lot of bit of hybrid reverb. Without these plugins, the instrument does have that decay, but it doesn't have that long tail that we're looking for. You want to make sure that the patterns themselves within your ambient music are very simplistic. Simplistic brings that calming feeling to your listener. Now from here, I'm going to bring you two options. Basically, we want to create a drone. If your chord progression allows for it, what you can do is create a similar pad-like drift instrument underneath, and then just have a repeating chord or note throughout the piece of music. This can sometimes feel a little monotonous and a little bit dry. I would go for like a string-like pad, but again, it might just be a little bit too trebly for your mix. I like to be a little bit more creative, so I go up into that verb group where I've got that hybrid reverb, turn up that dry wet to 100% and turn on freeze. From here, you get a constant drone, and it blurs the lines of where one note is starting and another is ending. From here, you can just go Command T to get an audio layer, choose to resample, and record that audio layer in. You can now use that as a sample within your music. I like to go one step further and add that to the free Granulator 2 device so that there's a little bit more movement. I've included Granulator in previous episodes and shorts, so make sure that you check them out after this video if you want a rundown. Of course, for this example, I've pitched it down 1 octave, added the EQ, some more hybrid reverb, and the LFO to control that Granulator device's file position. Finally, that brings us to our last instrument, which is the bass. Now for this example, because I'm using Drift, I've used 3 bass instruments. If I was using something like Serum or Vital, I would use just 1 instance of that plugin. But because we're doing that weird detune thing and we can only use Oscillator 2, I've used 3 instruments, 1 for the left pan, 1 for the right, and 1 for the sub. If you have a better option using drifts, do let me know in the comments below. Now for our top bass, we've pretty much replicated that first drift instrument that I showed you. We don't have the noise turned on, but the detune is around 30%, and we just have that filter frequency way higher, so we're getting all of that nice buzzy treble. As I flick between both top and bottom instruments, you can see that there are just minor changes. Now these two instruments are made with a saw wave. The bottom instrument is made with a sine tone and is set to mono. That's just going to give us the fundamental frequency for this bass tone. And this is also a very simple pattern. After that, just apply the EQ8 and call it done. I should mention it can also be quite helpful to add an extra group to all of your musical instruments. Add an instance of RC20, or if you don't have that, something like vibrato and noise, just to add a small touch of analog feel and instability. And there we have it, guys. That's ambient music in the style of Øneheart. Don't forget, if you do head over to the Patreon, you can download yourself a blank ambient music template. And I've also included the project where I've recreated Øneheart Snowfall, so you can see how that's made within this same template as well. This episode was sponsored by DistroKid, who I think are the fastest and most helpful distributor to get your music on over 200 platforms. I've used them for years, and if you want to start using them, you can use the link in the description below, as you'll get 7% off your first year. How did you find this video, and what do you want to see in future episodes? Thank you so much for swinging by. As I approach my 300th episode, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.